going to talk about Afghanistan, and I put this on the map so you have some idea, those who don't have an idea, of where Afghanistan is. 1996, a group of very extremist militants who have been fighting for control of the government of Afghanistan were able to wrestle control from the current, what was at the time the current government of the government of Afghanistan, that was backed by the Russians and by the Soviet Union. Anyway, these guys got control, okay? And they were able to get control in very, well, actually, let me not say that, but they got control. And now they're running the country of Afghanistan. And these guys have a very extreme view of Islam. And actually, it's so extreme that probably the vast majority of the men who were part of this militia group, who were ended up being part of the government, or a huge number of them, are not even literate. They don't even read the Quran, and many of them can't even read the Quran, but they have a very extremist viewpoint of the Quran. All right? Next slide. And some of their extreme views are these things right here. No television, no music, no cinema. And Afghanistan had become a pretty modern society by many standards, including many women in the 70s and 80s wearing miniskirts, okay, publicly and openly. It's very, very progressive in lots of different ways. No tobacco, which probably is not really a bad thing. Actually, no tobacco. No school for girls. Girls and women could not go to school. Men couldn't shave their beard. In fact, it was like a three-finger thing. You had to be able to hold your beard, pull your beard together with three fingers. No loud laughing for women. I mean, there's a long list of things, but these are kind of the silly things. No kite flying, no internet, all of these things. And women not being able to leave the home without being fully covered, and not being able to leave the home without men. So very extremist perspective on gender and sexual relations. Okay? Now, next slide. So I say this because if you know nothing about Islam, and all you know are things like the Taliban, you might imagine that Islam is a very backward religion. But here is a Muslim scholar. I just pulled this photo out. And there are as many Muslim scholars as there are Christian and Jewish scholars. The thinking and scholarship in Islam is really profound. And in fact, throughout the Arab world and the Muslim world, scholarship is extremely advanced in so many different ways, including in the ways of science. And I say this because it's important that you not think that the men who were able to wrestle control of that government represent Muslims. They represent a narrow vision of Islamic thought. Very narrow. Okay, next slide. It would be as though these guys were somehow able to wrestle control of the government in the United States. And they had a very extremist Christian perspective, a racist, ethnocentric, extremist Christian perspective that they imposed on the rest of the country. And then the rest of the country had to follow these folks right here. Okay? So this is when you think Taliban, think these folks. So the story today starts right here on September 11, 2001. When a small group of 20, again, extremist Muslim terrorists, the so-called 20 Islamic terrorists, it's really hard to call them Islamic because of their narrow, distorted, and really horrific views and thoughts that they created for themselves out of Islam. But nonetheless, September 11th, this guy, Osama bin Laden, was the mastermind behind September 11th. And this guy was living in the hills, in the mountains, in the caves of Afghanistan. And the Taliban tolerated him being there, but he was there. And if you know anything about the terrain and topography of Afghanistan, it is not difficult for this guy to be living there and just minding his own business and doing his own thing. We decide pretty quickly he's behind September 11th, and then we send our military into Afghanistan to kill him. And in the process of sending the military into Afghanistan to kill him, we also overthrow the Taliban, the militants who had taken over Afghanistan. That's the background of the story. The story we're going to tell today begins with this gentleman on the right. This is Rafi. The U.S. and NATO was trying to find some innovative ways to bring civilians in Afghanistan together with soldiers and future soldiers as part of their pre-deployment training. So that when soldiers land on the ground in a conflict zone, in a place like Afghanistan, they've already met some people on the ground. They've met citizens of the country where they are deploying. And the idea is that the more soldiers are prepared, the more they understand, and the more they're prepared, and the more they engage, the more likelihood that we can reduce conflict where conflict doesn't need to be, and we save lives. We save the lives of innocent civilians, and we save the lives of deployed soldiers. Because you don't want conflict, you don't want unnecessary conflict. So the military, NATO in particular, in an advanced thinking said, hey, you have this thing at Penn State called World in Conversation. Can you develop a dialogue tool that would allow our soldiers, before they deploy, to have conversations with people in conflict zones? And can you work in Afghanistan? So I reached out, I got on the web, and I started looking for Afghans, because they said, you got to have an Afghan partner. And I found Rafi, and for some reason, I just knew that this was the guy. So I email him, he emails me back, he agrees to participate in this project, and 5 months later, we're sitting in a cafeteria. We're sitting in a restaurant in Dubai. This is an hour after he and I had met officially face to face. We both flew into Dubai together. Before long, we're at NATO headquarters defending a grant. We wrote this 86-page grant proposal, and they invited us there and said, why don't you come and defend this in front of all the nations? And so in this photo here that's me. The handsome guy on the left is me. My wife, Lori, this is Rafi, and this is Serge. The one on the right is Serge Dadepo. And Serge had been a collaborator and a partner on this, because Serge worked at NATO Allied Transformation Command, okay? And Serge was a big proponent of this project, and we all met, and Serge's like, yeah, let's move this forward. And so the four of us go to NATO, and we defend it, and we get the grant. And now this is the second time that I had met Rafi, okay? So this is us right outside of NATO headquarters. Go ahead. And on that trip, and I put this picture up here because this is a really important picture, because this picture ended up saving Rafi's life. We stopped at an army base outside of Brussels. And we were meeting with some folks who were going to participate in our project, and we had lunch with some of the officers. Okay? Next slide. And here was the project. Using video conferencing tools, we had a group of people in Afghanistan, so you see that's the group on the top. Civilians, young people mostly. We have cadets in military academies, and so the academy on the bottom right is from the Italian Air Force, and then we had our two facilitators here at Penn State, and they would have these conversations and dialogues so that the cadets who would be deployed at some point, this is all part of their training, would have the ability to have this conversation with people on the other side of the world. And this is important because we've now started our Afghanistan dialogue, so you all, or some people in this room, when you sign up for them, have the exact same experience of having these conversations with civilians in Afghanistan. Okay. And then here's another slide. Next one. These are cadets at the academy in Belgium, I think, right? The Royal. No, this might be the Netherlands, actually, the Dutch cadets. And we're talking with young people in Afghanistan and facilitators at World in Conversation. So this is how it went. And we just did dialogue after dialogue after dialogue with, in the end, 5 different universities around Afghanistan, and people just talking and trying to really get a sense of what was happening and what was happening on the ground. And the Afghans really wanted to talk to the soldiers, because the only thing they ever saw of soldiers is when the soldiers were just rolling through the streets. And they said, we actually want to talk to them. So next slide. So we had a big team. This was a meeting that we have. We bring our Afghan team together with our Penn State team and other folks. This is one of the meetings in New Delhi. Next slide. Here's another meeting the next year in New Delhi. This is our Afghan team. And then next one. And then we became friends, right? So now I've been seeing, Rafi was here in the United States. That very first photo that I showed, if you notice, that was right here in 100 Thomas. And, his daughters become like my nieces. They are my nieces, right? I become Uncle Sam to them. So they become a deep bond, just really, really cool kids, right? So here we go. As part of this, we start working with ROTC. We work with West Point. We work with a couple ROTC programs around the country, but we also work with Penn State ROTC. And ROTC, if you're not from the United States and you don't know what that is, it's Reserve Officers Training Corps. And what it is, that it's a method by which people can study and then graduate, and as they graduate, then they become officers in the military. So you can go to one of the military academies like West Point or the Air Force Academy or Annapolis in Maryland for the Navy, or you can join an ROTC unit or program on a campus. So these are all students who were here at Penn State studying just like everybody else, but they were also going to be in the military and serve for at least 4 years. Okay?